us whole, to sanctify our hearts, to cleanse our souls against the drift of modern lies. Calvin's institutes stand for the truth that never dies. Through systematic depths we seek the light, teach God's word and do what's right. In a world where truth is often denied, the voice of clarity turns the tide. Through Calvin's wisdom we make our way, the cage-stage crusader guides us today. And this is what he has to say in the realm where philosophy and faith entwine. Calvin's wisdom weaves a tapestry divine, a journey through doctrines, theological art. Let's embark on a poetic exploration, a work of art. In Aristotle's shadow, some minds astray, denying the soul's immortality, God's glory betray. Calvin marks his course with reason so clear, against absurd subtleties his voice we revere and fear. Chained to the body, they claim the soul's tie. Organized, they say, incapable to fly. Calvin context, the soul's reach knows no bounds beyond bodily functions. Its freedom resounds, counting stars, measuring heavens. The soul takes its flight beyond the body's confines, a celestial light. Calvin asserts intellectual pursuits of the soul's soul. In astronomy stands its brilliance is shown, a work of art. Strong's worth Calvin does not refute, but organized symmetry is not the sole attribute. Intellectual pursuits, the soul's guiding hand. In the vast cosmic dance it takes its stand. From heaven to earth, swift glances it throws, creative thoughts, predictions, the soul's power shows. Calvin paints a picture, diverse and grand, the soul's agility, a divine imprint on man. In the silence of sleep, the soul's work unfolds. Revolve thoughts, arguments, the story it molds. Calvin presents evidence, the divine touch we bear. Even in slumber, God's presence is there. Divine qualities in man, yet God denied. Contradictions profound, Calvin's pen applied. The ability to judge, discern justice and right. He lies a heavenly judge in God's holy light. In God's holy light.
Okay. See, you're on camera now. You can stop meowing and whining for attention. Everybody is looking at you now. See, you're the pretty kitty. Now you're world famous. You can stop whining and crying and being a noisy little kitty. Don't need that much attention. Come on, behave. Cats. Gotta love them. Welcome to my fortress of theology. I am Jonathan, the Cage Stage Crusader, and I'm on a pilgrimage through John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion as a way to better understand and know what it is I believe and why I believe it, and as an exercise in sanctification. So come along with me as I exegetically go through each section point by point of John Calvin's Institutes of the Christian Religion. Today is Book 1, Chapter 5, Section 5. So let's get into it. Calvin writes, "But my business at present is not with that sty. I wish rather to deal with those who, led away by absurd subtleties, are inclined by giving an indirect turn to the frigid doctrine of Aristotle, to employ it for the purpose both of disproving the immortality of the soul and robbing God of his rights. Under the pretext that the faculties of the soul are organized, they chain it to the body as if it were incapable of separate existence, while they endeavor, as much as in them lies, by pronouncing eulogisms on nature, to suppress the nature of God. But there is no ground for maintaining that the powers of the soul are confined to the performance of bodily functions. What has the body to do with your measuring the heavens, counting the number of the stars, ascertaining their magnitudes, their relative distances, the rate at which they move, and the orbits which they describe? I deny not that astronomy has its use. All I mean to show is that these lofty investigations are not conducted by organized symmetry, but by the faculties of the soul itself, apart altogether from the body. The single example I have given will suggest many others to the reader. Swift and versatile movements of the soul in glancing from heaven to earth, connecting the future with the past, retaining the remembrance of former years, nay, forming creations of its own. Its skill, moreover, in making astonishing discoveries and inventing so many wonderful arts are sure indications of the agency of God in man. What shall we say of its activity when the body is asleep? Its many revolving thoughts, its many useful suggestions, its many solid arguments, nay, its presentiment of things yet to come. What shall we say but that man bears about with him a stamp of immortality which can never be effaced? But how is it possible for man to be divine, yet not acknowledge his creator? Shall we say by means of a power of judging implanted in our breast, distinguish between justice and injustice, and yet there be no judge in heaven? Shall some remains of intelligence continue with us in sleep, and yet no God keep watch in heaven? Shall we be deemed the inventors of so many arts and useful properties? God may be defrauded of his praise, though experience tells us plainly enough that whatever we possess is dispensed to us in unequal measure by another hand. The talk of certain persons concerning a secret inspiration, quickening the whole world, is not only silly but altogether profane. Such persons are delighted with the following celebrated passage of Virgil. No, first that heaven and earth's compacted frame, and flowing waters the starry flame, and both the radiant lights one common soul inspires and feeds, and animates the whole. This active mind, infused through all the space, unites and mingles with the mighty mass, hence man and beast, breath of life obtain, and birds of air and monsters of the main. The ever real vigor is in all the same, and every soul is filled with equal flame. The meaning of all this, you think you're doing, you little bracky cat. The meaning of all this, that the world which is made to display the glory of God is its own creator. For the same poet has, in another place, adopted a view common to both Greeks and Latins. Hence to the bee some sages have assigned a portion of the God and heavenly mind, for God goes forth and spreads throughout the whole, heaven and earth and sea and universal soul, each as at its birth from him all beings share, both man and brute. Breath of vital air to him return and loosen from earthly chain, fly whence they sprung and rest in God again. Spurn at the grave and fearless of decay, dwell in high heaven, art star the ethereal way. Here we see how far that jejune speculation of a universal mind animating and invigorating the world is fitted to beget and foster piety in our minds. We have a still clearer proof of this in the profane verses which the licentious Lucretius has written as a deduction from the same principle. The plain object is to form an unsubstantial deity, and thereby banish the true God whom we ought to fear and worship. I admit indeed that the expressions Nature as God may be piously used if dictated by a pious mind, but it is inaccurate and harsh, nature being more properly the order which has been established by God in matters which are so very important, and in regard to Him, which special reverence is due. It does harm to confound the deity with the inferior operations of His hands. So you can see, as is usual, Calvin has written a lot of information in a lot of very few words, requiring an unpacking of what he is saying. Calvin's argument in this passage intertwines the nature of the soul, the attributes that reflect God's image within humanity, and his critique of viewing God as an impersonal force. He contends that the soul's attributes, such as reason, creativity, and moral discernment, point to a personal, relational God who cannot be reduced to impersonal natural forces. Calvin's theological perspective emphasizes the importance of recognizing and honoring God as a personal being, worthy of worship and reverence. Now let's go point by point through this section and expand on what Calvin's saying. The first point he made, but my business at present is not with that sty. Calvin here clarifies that he is not addressing those who openly reject religious beliefs, but those who subtly distort philosophical ideas. In this opening statement, but my business at present is not with that sty, John Calvin sets the stage for a critical examination of a particular intellectual stance. The term sty here metaphorically refers to the crude and overt rejection of religious beliefs, which Calvin chooses to set aside temporarily. Come here, you are wanting attention. Come here. Come on. Come on. There. Okay. Now you have attention. The term sty here metaphorically refers to the crude and overt rejection of religious beliefs, which Calvin chooses to set aside temporarily. Instead, he directs his attention towards a more insidious and intellectually sophisticated group of individuals who misuse philosophical ideas to undermine core Christian doctrines. Calvin's choice to engage with these subtler arguments reveals his strategic approach to the institutes of the Christian religion. Rather than addressing blatant atheism or outright heresy, he focuses on those who, under the guise of intellectual reasoning, distort philosophical concepts, specifically the teachings of Aristotle that challenge the immortality of the soul and diminish the sovereignty of God. By prioritizing this group, Calvin acknowledges the persuasive power such arguments can have on educated individuals who might be swayed by seemingly rational critiques of Christian doctrine. This point emphasizes Calvin's broader theological and apologetic goals. He aims to dismantle arguments that appear rational and logical on the surface, but ultimately lead believers away from essential Christian truths. Calvin's deep engagement with Aristotle's philosophy indicates his respect for the intellectual tradition, yet he remains vigilant against its misuse. He understands that if left unchallenged, these subtle distortions could weaken the faith of believers who might be enticed by their intellectual appeal. Moreover, Calvin's approach underscores his commitment to defending the Christian faith through rigorous intellectual engagement. He does not shy away from complex philosophical debates, but rather confronts them head on. This reflects his belief that Christian doctrine can withstand and indeed triumph over sophisticated philosophical scrutiny. Calvin's initial statement serves as a prelude to a detailed rebuttal of philosophical ideas misappropriated to undermine Christian beliefs, reinforcing his mission to protect and elucidate the truths of the faith. Second point Calvin makes, I wish rather to deal with those who, led away by absurd subtleties, are inclined by giving an indirect turn to the frigid doctrine of Aristotle, to employ it for the purpose both of disproving the immortality of the soul and robbing God of his rights. Here, Calvin focuses on those who misuse Aristotle's philosophy to deny the soul's immortality and undermine God's authority. In the statement, I wish rather to deal with those who, led away by absurd subtleties, are inclined by giving an indirect turn the frigid doctrine of Aristotle to employ for the purpose of disproving the immortality of the soul and robbing God of his rights. Calvin specifically targets a group of intellectuals who distort Aristotelian philosophy and challenge the fundamentals of Christian beliefs. Calvin's phrase, led away by absurd subtleties, highlights the sophisticated yet misleading nature of the arguments used by these individuals. These arguments are not straightforward denials, but rather a subtle reinterpretation that misleads through seemingly rational discourse. By referring to the frigid doctrine of Aristotle, Calvin characterizes the philosophical interpretations as cold and lifeless, implying they lack the warmth and truth of genuine theological insight. Calvin is particularly concerned with how these distortions are used to disprove the immortality of the soul. Aristotle's teachings, when misapplied, suggest that the soul is intrinsically linked to the physical body, which contradicts the Christian doctrine of the soul's eternal nature. Calvin sees this as a grave error that undermines the core aspect of Christian eschatology, the belief in life after death. Furthermore, Calvin accuses these philosophers of robbing God of his rights. By denying the immortality of the soul, they implicitly deny God's role as the creator and sustainer of an eternal soul. This not only diminishes God's authority, but also the reverence and obedience owed to him. Calvin's use of robbing underscores the severity of this intellectual crime. It is not merely an error, but a deliberate act of depriving God of his due glory and position. In focusing on these misapplications of Aristotle's philosophy, Calvin aims to protect the integrity of Christian doctrine against intellectual attacks that appear rational but are fundamentally flawed. He seeks to reaffirm the immortality of the soul and the supreme authority of God, countering the sophisticated yet deceptive arguments that attempt to erode these truths. This approach underscores Calvin's commitment to rigorous theological defense and his broader effort to safeguard the core tenets of the Christian faith from subtle yet dangerous philosophical distortions. The third point Calvin makes, under the pretext that the faculties of the soul are organized, they chain it to the body as if it were incapable of a separate existence, while they endeavor as much as in them lies by pronouncing eulogiums on nature to suppress the name of God. Critics claim the soul is not just an organized function of the body, but praise nature to obscure God's existence. In this statement, under the pretext that the faculties of the soul are organized, they chain it to the body as if it were incapable of a separate existence. Calvin addresses a critical philosophical error propagated by certain thinkers of his time. These critics argue that the soul's faculties are merely organized functions of the physical body, thereby denying the soul's independent and immortal nature. Calvin uses the use of pretext suggests that these critics falsely claim that the soul's abilities are simply the result of bodily organization. By doing so, they effectively chain the soul to the body, implying that the soul cannot exist apart from the physical form. This viewpoint directly contradicts the Christian doctrine of the soul's immortality and its existence beyond physical death. For Calvin, this error not only undermines the essential tenet of Christian theology, but also misrepresents the true nature of human existence as both physical and spiritual. Additionally, Calvin points out that these critics endeavor, as much as in them lies, to praise nature, which he describes as pronouncing eulogisms on nature. By glorifying nature, they attempt to shift focus away from the Creator God. This excessive praise of nature serves to suppress the name of God, effectively erasing God's role as the sovereign creator and sustainer of all life. Including the soul, Calvin sees this as a deliberate effort to diminish God's significance and authority, promoting a worldview where nature is self sufficient and divine. Calvin's critique underscores a broader concern about the philosophical trends of his time, which tended to elevate nature and human reason while downplaying or rejecting the divine. By highlighting this issue, Calvin reasserts the importance of acknowledging God's ultimate authority and the distinct immortal nature of the soul. He warns against the reductionist view that confines the soul to mere physical processes and emphasizes that true understanding of human nature and the world must include recognition of God's sovereignty and the soul's eternal destiny. Calvin is addressing the ideas propagated by Renaissance humanists and certain adherents of Aristotelian philosophy who were influenced during his time. These thinkers often interpreted Aristotle's ideas in ways that Calvin found problematic, particularly regarding the nature of the soul and the relationship between the soul and the body. Some of the key figures Calvin is indirectly referring to would be Pietro Pompanazzi, an Italian philosopher who argued against the immortality of the soul, positing that the soul's intellectual functions are dependent on the body and therefore cannot survive in death. Averroes, also known as Ibn Rushd, a medieval Islamic philosopher whose interpretations of Aristotle suggested a form of monopsychism, where all humans share a single universal intellect, which challenged the individual immortality of the soul. And then there was various Renaissance humanist figures like Lorenzo Valla and others who emphasized the study of classical texts and sometimes advanced naturalistic explanations that minimized or excluded divine intervention. The arguments Calvin is arguing against are the dependency of the soul on the body. Calvin refutes the argument that the soul's faculties are merely the result of bodily organization, implying that the soul cannot exist independently of the body. This idea undermines Christian doctrine of the soul's immortality. For example, Pompanazzi argued that intellectual functions depend on physical processes, thus denying personal immortality. Two, the nature as self-sufficient. Calvin criticizes the notion that nature is self-sufficient and can be understood without reference to God. This argument, rooted in the naturalistic tendencies of the Renaissance, suggested that the natural world operates autonomously, which Calvin saw as an attempt to suppress the acknowledgement of God's sovereignty. Third, the universal intellect, known as Averroism. Calvin opposes the Averroist idea that there is a single universal intellect shared by all humans. This view diminishes individual personal responsibility and the personal immortality of the soul, conflicting with Christian teachings about individual judgment and eternal life. Calvin's responses to these arguments would be: one, Calvin asserts the independence and immortality of the soul, arguing that the soul's faculties, such as reason and intellect, demonstrate its capacity to exist apart from the body. Two, he emphasizes that the complexity and capabilities of the human soul point to a divine creation and governance, not merely natural processes. And third, Calvin insists that recognizing the soul's immortality and God's sovereignty is crucial for true piety and understanding the human nature. He contends that these philosophical distortions mislead people and detract from the glory due to God. By engaging with these arguments, Calvin aims to reaffirm the Christian understanding of the soul and counter the philosophical trends that he believed were leading people away from essential truths about God and human nature. Now, the fourth point Calvin makes in this section of the Institutes is that there is no ground for maintaining that the powers of the soul are confined to the performance of bodily functions. This is where Calvin refutes the idea that the soul's abilities are limited to bodily functions. In the statement that there is no ground for maintaining that the powers of the soul are confined to the performance of bodily functions, John Calvin is uh, saying that this idea was prevalent among some philosophers of his time who argued that the soul's capabilities, such as thinking and reasoning, are inseparable from the body's biological processes. Calvin's refutation is based on the inherent distinction between the soul and the body. He asserts that the soul possesses abilities that cannot be attributed to mere physical functions. This is important. For instance, he points to the human capacity to measure the heavens, count the stars, understand their movements, and conceive abstract concepts, activities that transcend mere physicality. These activities, Calvin argues, illustrate the soul's capability to engage in intellectual pursuits that are not dependent on bodily organs. Moreover, Calvin highlights the soul's ability to perform extraordinary mental feats, such as remembering the past, imagining the future, and inventing arts and sciences. These functions indicate that the soul operates independently of the body's physical constraints. The swift and versatile movements of the soul, capable of glancing from heaven to earth and connecting disparate concepts, further exemplify the unique and divine nature. Additionally, Calvin emphasizes the soul's activity during sleep as evidence of its independence. Even when the body is at rest, the soul continues to engage in thoughts, dreams, and anticipations of future events. This ongoing mental activity, unaffected by the body's dormant state, underscores the soul's separate and enduring existence. By arguing against the confinement of the soul's powers to bodily functions, Calvin reaffirms the Christian doctrine of the soul's immortality and independence. He emphasizes that the soul's intellectual and spiritual capabilities point to a divine origin and and purpose, reinforcing the belief in an immortal soul that transcends physical existence. Calvin's argument is a robust defense of the soul's distinct and superior nature, challenging the reductionist view that reduces the soul to a mere bodily functions. He insists that true understanding of human nature must recognize the soul's independent and immortal qualities, which reflect the divine image and purpose bestowed by God. The fifth point Kelvin makes is, what has the body to do with your measuring of the heavens, counting the number of the stars, ascertaining their magnitudes, their relative distances, the rate which they move, and the orbits which they describe? He questions how bodily functions can account for astronomical knowledge, implying the soul's independence. In his discussion of the soul, John Calvin scrutinizes the role of bodily functions in intellectual pursuits, particularly exemplified in the field of astronomy. He queries, what has the body to do with your measuring the heavens, counting the number of stars, ascertaining their magnitudes, etc.? Calvin's rhetorical question underscores the inadequacy of attributing such profound knowledge solely to bodily functions. He contends that the intricate and sophisticated activities involved in astronomy, such as abstract reasoning and mathematical calculation, transcend the physical capabilities of the human body. Calvin asserts that the ability to engage in astronomical observation, calculation, all demonstrate the distinct and superior nature of the soul. These intellectual pursuits, he argues, serve as evidence of the soul's independence from the body. While the body may facilitate sensory input, it is the soul that processes, interprets, and understands this information, revealing its divine origin and unique capabilities. Moreover, Kelvin emphasizes that the complexity and depth of human knowledge in fields like astronomy cannot be adequately explained by physical processes alone. The soul's ability to comprehend and manipulate abstract concepts, predict celestial phenomena, and develop sophisticated scientific theories surpass mere bodily functions. This intellectual prowess serves as a testament to the soul's independence and immortality. In light of Calvin's understanding of the soul, it is crucial to delineate its essential attributes. The soul, according to Calvin, is the immaterial, immortal essence of a human being that reflects the image of God. It is distinct from the physical body and serves as a seat of all higher cognitive functions, emotions, and will. Endowed with intellectual and spiritual faculties, the soul enables humans to reason, understand, and engage with divine truths. And so essentially, the soul in Calvin's thought is simply consciousness. Calvin underscores the soul's independence from the body, emphasizing its autonomy in intellectual and spiritual pursuits. While intimately connected, the soul operates independently, especially in its higher functions. Moreover, Calvin asserts that the soul possesses moral and ethical dimensions, distinguishing between right and wrong, justice and injustice, and serving as a locus of conscience and accountability to God. Calvin's discussion of the soul highlights its paramount importance in human nature and its direct relationship to God. The soul, as Calvin describes it, embodies the divine image, operates independently of the body, and has an eternal destiny, underscoring its significance beyond temporal physical life. Sixth point made by Calvin: I deny not that astronomy has its use. All I mean to show is that these lofty investigations are not conducted by organized symmetry, but by the faculties of the soul itself, apart altogether from the body. He's pointing out that astronomy is useful, but its achievements demonstrate the soul's capabilities beyond bodily functions. Calvin acknowledges the utility of astronomy while emphasizing that its achievement surpasses the realm of organized bodily functions. Calvin's affirming the practical value of astronomy, but he's also asserting that its lofty investigations are primarily conducted by the faculties of the soul, independent of bodily organization. Calvin's acknowledgement of astronomy's utility indicates his recognition of its practical benefits, such as navigation, timekeeping, and understanding the cosmos. However, he distinguishes between the instrumental use of astronomy and the profound intellectual endeavors involved in its study. Calvin contends that these lofty investigations, which include tasks like measuring celestial distances and understanding the movements of the stars, transcend mere organized symmetry of bodily functions. By stating that these investigations are conducted by the faculties of the soul apart from the body, Calvin underscores the soul's capacity for intellectual and spiritual pursuits beyond physical constraints. He suggests that the human soul possesses inherent faculties that enable it to engage in abstract reasoning, mathematical calculation, and the contemplation of celestial phenomena. These intellectual pursuits are not dependent on bodily organization, but reflect the soul's distinct and superior nature. Calvin's statement highlights the dual perspective on astronomy, recognizing its practical utility while emphasizing the soul's role in its loftier intellectual pursuits. By affirming the soul's capabilities beyond bodily functions, Calvin underscores the significance of intellectual and spiritual faculties in the study of astronomy, reaffirming the soul's autonomy and divine endowments. The seventh point is the single example I have given will suggest many others to the reader. This example of astronomy is just one of many that highlights the soul's distinct power. So Kelvin is asking, like his statement of this being a single example, serves as an invitation to explore the multifaceted ways in which the soul manifests its autonomy and influence across diverse human endeavors. His choice to illustrate the soul's distinct powers through astronomy implies that this field is just one among many where the soul's autonomy becomes evident. Consider the creativity, for instance, of the human soul that can understand the natural world through the sciences, but is also creative. As just an example, let's look at the science fiction franchise Warhammer 40K. Consider the example of artistic creation. When a painter produces a masterpiece or a composer creates a symphony, it's not merely the result of physical coordination, but rather the expression of the soul's creativity and imagination. This creative process is driven not just by intellect, but by the soul's innate desire to explore and create. In the same vein, within the Warhammer 40K community of hobbyists and fans and whatnot, hobbyists will meticulously paint these tiny little miniatures, or artists will craft intricate illustrations of the grim darkness of the imagined 41st millennium. They channel the depths of their soul's creativity and imagination into these things. Moreover, in the realm of philosophy, when a thinker formulates profound metaphysical concepts or ethical principles, it reflects the soul's capacity for abstract reasoning and moral discernment. Enthusiasts within Warhammer 40K engage in rich philosophical discussions, debating the ethics of the imperium of man's authoritarian regime, or contemplating the existential dread embodied by the chaos god. These debates exercise the soul's capacity for abstract reasoning and moral discernment. Furthermore, the act of world building within the 40K universe itself is a testament to the soul's creativity. Writers and game developers weave intricate narratives, constructing entire galaxies filled with diverse civilizations, epic battles, and cosmic struggles. Creative processes reflect the soul's innate desire to explore and create, transcending mere physicality. Through Kelvin's remark and the diverse activities you can see within Warhammer and other such places like franchises and even academic exercises, we're reminded of the profound role played by the soul in shaping intellectual, creative, and spiritual endeavors. Whether through painting miniatures, exploring lore, or contemplating the philosophical underpinnings of the 40K universe, participants engage in activities that reflect the enduring powers of the human spirit. Just as artistic creation and philosophical inquiry are expressions of the soul's deepest faculties in the real world, so too do they manifest within the expansive realms of the Warhammer 40K universe, demonstrating the enduring power of the human spirit in both the mundane and the fantastical. The eighth point Calvin makes in this section, the swift and versatile movements of the soul in glancing from heaven to earth, connecting the future with the past, retaining the remembrance of former years, nay, forming creations of his own, its skill, moreover, in making astonishing discoveries and inventing so many wonderful arts, are sure indications of the agency of God in man. So he's talking about the soul's rapid thoughts, memory, creativity, discovery, and inventions are signifying God's influence. In this passage, Calvin underscores the dynamic and multifaceted nature of the human soul, attributing its swift movements, memory, creativity, discoveries, and inventions to the agency of God within man. Calvin suggests that the soul's capabilities, including its ability to swiftly traverse between heavenly and earthly realms, connect past and future, retain memories, and engage in creative endeavors, are all indicative of divine intervention. Calvin's emphasis on the soul's rapid and versatile movements highlighted its agility and capacity for transcendence. The soul's ability to effortlessly navigate between different realms of thought and perception reflect its divine origin and its connection to God's overarching plan for humanity. Moreover, Calvin emphasizes the soul's role as the seat of memory, indicating that its ability to retain past experiences and knowledge is a testament to God's providential guidance and care. Furthermore, Calvin attributes the soul's creativity, discoveries, and inventions to the agency of God within man by highlighting humanity's capacity to engage in innovative pursuits and make astonishing advancements in various fields. Calvin underscores the divine spark that ignites human creativity and ingenuity. Soul's ability to conceive new ideas, make groundbreaking discoveries, and invent transformative technologies serve as evidence of God's presence and influence within the human spirit. In essence, Calvin's exegesis of the soul's attributes serve to underscore the divine imprint upon humanity. By recognizing the soul's dynamic movements, memory, creativity, discoveries, and inventions as manifestations of God's agency within man, Calvin emphasizes the profound significance of the soul in reflecting the image of its creator through these attributes. Calvin asserts that the human soul serves as a conduit for divine intervention, embodying God's presence and purpose in the world. Now, on to the ninth point. What shall we say of its activity when the body is asleep? Its many revolving thoughts, its many useful suggestions, its many solid arguments, nay, its presentiment of things yet to come. The soul's active thoughts, useful ideas, and foresight during sleep are indicative of the soul's immortality. Calvin here highlights the soul's activity during sleep, pointing to continuous engagement in thought, suggestion, argumentation, and even premonition. Just as these phenomena occurring within when the body is at rest serve as compelling evidence of the soul's immortality. Firstly, Calvin's reference to the soul's many revolving thoughts during sleep suggests that the mind remains active and engaged, even when the body is in a state of rest. This ongoing mental activity implies that the soul operates independently of the body's physiological state, furthermore, reinforcing the notion of its immaterial and enduring nature. Additionally, Calvin mentions the soul's generation of many useful suggestions and solid arguments during sleep. This indicates that the soul continues to engage in cognitive processes that contribute to problem solving, creativity, and intellectual development. Such mental activities during sleep underscore the soul's capacity for independent thought and activity and reasoning, further supporting the idea of its immortality. Moreover, Calvin alludes to the soul's ability to have presentiments of things yet to come during sleep. This reference to foresight or precognition suggests that the soul transcends the constraint of time and space, providing glimpses into future events. Such premonitions imply deeper connection to a realm beyond the physical world, emphasizing the soul's eternal nature and capacity for intuitive understanding. Personally, I think that premonitions and intuitions that happen in dreams are just mind doing a lot of really pattern recognition and putting things into place and seeing how one thing leads to another. So it's just sort of like intuitive sort of pattern recognition that we wouldn't normally acknowledge or go through. In summary, Calvin's exegesis of the soul's activity during sleep underscores the immortality and transcendence, highlighting the soul's continuous engagement in thought, suggestion, argumentation, and foresight. Even when the body is at rest, Calvin suggested the soul operates independently of bodily functions and remains active beyond the confines of the physical realm. This interpretation aligns with Calvin's broader theological framework, which emphasizes the enduring nature of the soul and its connection to the divine. Point 10. What shall we say? But that man bears about him with him a stamp of immortality which can never be effaced. The soul's attributes imply an indelible mark of immortality in humans. Calvin asserts that the soul's inherent attributes, including its capacity for thought, memory, creativity, and foresight, serve as an enduring testament to humanity's immortal nature. By stating that man bears about with him a stamp of immortality which can never be effaced, Calvin emphasizes the indelible mark of eternity inherent in every human being. Calvin's use of the term stamp of immortality evokes the image of a permanent and unchangeable impression, suggesting that the soul's immortal essence is an intricate aspect of human nature. Metaphorical language implies that the soul's immortality is not a transient or conditional state, but an inherent characteristic that defines the essence of humanity. Furthermore, Calvin's assertion that the stamp of immortality can never be effaced underscores the permanence and irrevocability of the soul's eternal nature. Regardless of external circumstances or earthly limitations, the soul retains its intrinsic connection to the divine and its eternal destiny beyond the temporal realm. In essence, Calvin's exegesis of the soul's immortality serves to affirm the transcendent, enduring nature of human existence. By highlighting the soul's by highlighting the soul's indelible mark of eternity, Calvin underscores the profound significance of each individual as a bearer of divine likeness and a participant in the eternal purposes of God. This interpretation aligns with Calvin's broader theological framework, which emphasizes the sovereignty of God and the eternal destiny of humanity in communion with the divine. Point 11. But how is it possible for man to be divine and yet not acknowledge his creator? It is contradictory for humans to exhibit divine traits and not recognize God. In this statement, John Calvin addresses the apparent contradiction of humans exhibiting divine attributes while simultaneously failing to acknowledge their creator. Calvin argues that it's incongruous for individuals to manifest qualities associated with divinity, such as reason, creativity, and moral discernment, without acknowledging the source of those attributes, namely God. Calvin's assertion reflects his theological perspective, which emphasizes the inherent connection between humanity and divinity. According to Calvin, humans are created in the image of God, imbued with qualities that reflect the divine nature. These include intellectual faculties, moral consciousness, and capacity for spiritual communion. However, Calvin contends that this divine likeness is not self generated, but is bestowed upon humans by their Creator. Therefore, Calvin finds it contradictory for individuals to exhibit divine traits while denying or neglecting the existence of God. He argues that such a stance overlooks the fundamental relationship between Creator and creation. Whereas God is the ultimate source of all that is good, true, and noble in human nature, to deny God's existence or to reject the acknowledgement of his role in shaping human identity is to sever the vital connection between humanity and its divine origins. Furthermore, Calvin suggests that the refusal to acknowledge God, despite manifesting divine attributes, reflects the deeper spiritual blindness or rebellion. It's not merely a matter of intellectual inconsistency, but a symptom of a heart that is engaged estranged from its creator. Calvin would likely interpret this contradiction as evidence of humanity's fallen condition, wherein sin distorts and obscures the inherent knowledge of God that should be evident in every human soul. Calvin's exegesis of the statement underscores the inherent contradiction of humans exhibiting the divine traits while denying acknowledgement of the Creator. He emphasizes the fundamental relationship between humanity and divinity, wherein God is the source of all that is good and noble in human nature. To deny this relationship is to overlook the fundamental truths of human existence and to live in spiritual blindness and rebellion. So, point 12. Shall we, by means of a power of judging implanted in our breast, distinguish between justice and injustice? There be no judging between them. So, point 12. Shall we, by means of a power of judging implanted in our breast, distinguish between justice and injustice, and yet there be no judge in heaven? The human capacity to judge right from wrong implies the existence of a divine judge. In this statement, John Calvin highlights the inherent human capacity to discern between justice and injustice, right and wrong. He argues that the ability to judge moral distinctions, which is implanted within the human breast, implies the existence of a higher authority who serves as the ultimate arbiter of justice. Calvin's assertion reflects his theological perspective, which emphasizes the divine origin of the moral law and the inherent sense of conscience within every human being. According to Calvin, humans are endowed with an innate awareness of moral principles, which enables them to distinguish between right and wrong. This moral discernment is not self generated, but is instilled within the human conscience by the divine creator. Therefore, Calvin finds it inconceivable that humans would possess the ability to judge moral distinctions without there being a corresponding judge in heaven. He argues that the existence of a human capacity for moral judgment implies the existence of a higher authority which presides over the affairs of humanity and administers justice according to divine standards. Furthermore, Calvin suggests that the presence of a divine judge serves as the ultimate guarantor of moral order and accountability. He contends that without the belief in a transcendent judge who upholds justice and punishes wrongdoing, moral distinctions would lose their significance, and human society would descend into chaos and lawlessness. In summary, Calvin's exegesis of this statement underscores the intimate connection between human moral discernment and the existence of a divine judge. He emphasizes that the human capacity to distinguish between right and wrong implies the existence of a higher authority who serves as the ultimate arbiter of justice and ensures the moral order of the universe. Interpretation aligns with Calvin's broader theological framework, which emphasizes the sovereignty of God and the divine origin of moral law. The 13th point Calvin makes, shall some remains of intelligence continue with us in sleep and yet no God, keep watch in heaven? The persistence of intelligence in sleep suggests divine guardian. In this statement, John Calvin draws attention to the phenomenon of intelligence persisting even during sleep, posing rhetorical question about the absence of a divine guardian. Calvin argues that the fact that some remnants of intelligence remain within humans during sleep implies the existence of a divine presence watching over them. Calvin's assertion reflects a theological perspective which emphasizes the omnipresence and providence of God. According to Calvin, God is actively involved in every aspect of human existence, including the unconscious state of sleep. Calvin contends that even in the depths of sleep, when consciousness is diminished, some remnants of intelligence persist, indicating a divine presence that sustains and preserves human life. Therefore, Calvin finds it inconceivable that intelligence would continue to function during sleep without the watchful oversight of a divine guardian. He argues that the persistence of cognitive faculties during sleep serves as evidence of God's constant vigilance and care for humanity. Furthermore, Calvin suggests that the presence of a divine guardian during sleep serves as a source of comfort and assurance for believers. He contends that the awareness of God's watchful gaze provides solace and security, even in moments of vulnerability and unconsciousness. You doing naughty kitty things again? I think you are. You little depraved kitty. And I'll lock you in a cage and make you listen to Paul Washer talk about you. Yeah. Calvin's exegesis of the statement underscores the belief in a divine guardian who watches over humans, even during the state of sleep. He emphasizes that the persistence of intelligence during sleep serves as evidence of God's active involvement in human affairs and his unwavering care for his creation. This interpretation aligns with Calvin's broader theological framework, which emphasizes the providence and sovereignty of God in all aspects of life. 14th point, shall we be deemed the inventors of so many arts and useful properties that God may be defrauded of his praise? Though experience tells us plainly enough that whatever we possess is dispensed to us in unequal measures by another hand. Talking about how human inventions and talents not eclipse the praise due to God who distributes these gifts. He's critiquing the tendency to attribute human accomplishments solely to human ingenuity, thereby neglecting the acknowledgement of divine providence. Calvin emphasizes that while humans have indeed developed numerous arts and useful skills, these should not lead to a sense of self sufficiency that eclipses the praise due to God. According to Calvin, human talents and inventions are not entirely self generated, but are distributed by God. He argues that attributing these achievements solely to human efforts defraud God of the praise and recognition he deserves. Calvin points out that human experiences consistently demonstrate that our talents and abilities are not equally distributed. This unequal distribution suggests the influence of a higher power who allocates these gifts according to his will. For Calvin, this understanding should lead to humility and gratitude, recognizing that whatever abilities or successes humans possess are ultimately gifts from God. Moreover, Calvin's arguments align with the broader theological perspective that all good things come from God. He underscores the idea that human creativity and ingenuity are reflections of divine generosity. This perspective calls for acknowledging God as the ultimate source of all human capabilities and accomplishments. by reminding his audience that talents and skills are dispensed in unequal measures by another hand. Calvin urges the recognition of God's sovereignty and benevolence. This acknowledgement fosters a sense of humility and dependence on God rather than pride in human achievements alone. Calvin's statement calls for a balanced view that appreciates human ingenuity while giving due praise to God. It underscores the importance of recognizing God's role in bestowing diverse talents and abilities upon humanity. This perspective encourages humility, gratitude, and a deeper appreciation of divine providence in all human endeavors. Okay, on to 15. Point 15. The talk of certain persons concerning the secret inspiration quickening the whole world is not only silly, but altogether profane. He claims the universal inspiration animating the world are foolish and impious. He addresses the critiques and beliefs held by some that a vague universal inspiration or life force animates the world. Calvin finds this idea both foolish and irreverent. Firstly, Calvin describes such talk as silly, meaning that he considers it devoid of serious thought or grounding in truth. The notion of a secret universal inspiration lacks a basis in the Christian understanding of God and his creation. Calvin argues that attributing the animation of the world to an impersonal force undermines the recognition of God's active and personal role in creation and providence. Secondly, Calvin deems this belief altogether profane. In calling it profane, he implies that it is not just incorrect but also disrespectful to God. The idea of a universal life force that is separate from God diverts glory and reverence away from the Creator. For Calvin, such a belief diminishes God's sovereignty and his intimate involvement with his creation. By attributing the wonders and life in the world to a vague inspiration rather than to God, people fail to give God the honor and worship he deserves. Calvin's criticism here reflects the fundamental tenet of his theology, the sovereignty and providence of God. He is insisting that uh, he insists that God is the sole source of all life and the sustainer of the universe. Anything that detracts from this truth is not only incorrect but also detracts from God's glory. Calvin's emphasis is on maintaining a proper understanding of God's role in the world, which necessitates rejecting ideas that obscure or misrepresent God's active governance. Calvin's critique of the belief in a universal inspiration that animates the world underscores his commitment to the Christian doctrine of God's sovereignty. He views such beliefs as not only erroneous, but also irreverent because they fail to acknowledge God's rightful place as the creator and sustainer of all life. By doing so, Calvin urges believers to recognize and honor God's active presence and role in the world. Point 16. Such persons are delighted with the following celebrated passage of Virgil. Calvin then cites Virgil's poetry as an example of the erroneous beliefs in a universal soul. Calvin addresses those who would adhere to the belief of a universal soul or life force that animates the world. Calvin is introducing this idea by reference to the Roman poet Virgil, indicating that certain individuals find support for their erroneous beliefs in Virgil's poetry. Calvin is referring to this passage from Virgil's work that depicts the natural world as being infused with a divine presence or spirit. For instance, in Virgil's Aeneid, where there are descriptions of nature imbued with divine qualities, such can be interpreted as suggesting a kind of pantheistic or animistic worldview. This interpretation aligns with the idea of a universal soul that animates all things, a notion Calvin rejects as incompatible with Christian doctrine. Citing Virgil, Calvin critiques the misuse of classical literature to support the theological positions that deviate from Orthodox Christian beliefs. He argues that the administration of such passages reflects a misunderstanding of both the literary context and the theological implications. Calvin views the appropriation of Virgil's poetry to support the concept of a universal soul as a misrepresentation that diverts glory from God and attributes it instead to an impersonal force. Uh, if you don't know who Virgil was, he's known as Publius Virgilianus Maro, commonly known as Virgil. He lived from 70 BC to 19 BC, was a Roman poet renowned for his epic poetry and significant influence on Western literature. Born in the village of the Andes near Mantua in northern Italy, Virgil received an education in Cremona, Milan, and Rome, where he studied rhetoric, medicine, and astronomy, although his primary passion was literature. Virgil's most famous works include Ecloges, the Georgicus, and the Aeneid. The Ecloges, a collection of pastoral poems, reflect on rural life and were influenced by Greek poetry. The Georgics are didactic poems about agriculture, blending practical advice with mythological elements. The Aeneid, his magnum opus, is an epic poem that tells the story of Aeneas, a Trojan hero in his journey to Italy, where he becomes the ancestor of the Romans. This work was likely commissioned by Augustus Caesar and served to legitimize the Julian dynasty by linking it to the heroic and divine past. Virgil's influence has been profound and enduring, shaping not only Roman culture but also the broader Western literary tradition. In the Middle Ages, Virgil was often regarded as a sage and a prophet of sorts, partly due to his portrayal of a prophetic figure in the Eclogies, where he is later interpreted by Christians as predicting the birth of Jesus. During the Renaissance, Virgil's works were studied by models of Latin style and poetic excellence. Portrayal of pietas, duty, piety, and loyalty in the Aeneid resonated with Renaissance humanists who saw in Virgil characters the virtues they sought to emulate. In more modern times, Virgil's influence extends to education, literature, and the arts. His works have been translated into numerous languages and can be part of a classical education. The Aeneid, in particular, has inspired countless adaptations, artworks, and literary references. Calvin's reference to Virgil serves to highlight how classical literature can be misappropriated to support non Christian or even heretical ideas. By pointing out that some individuals delight in Virgil's passages that seem to endorse a universal soul, Calvin underscores the need for careful theological discernment. He warns against allowing poetic imagery and metaphor to distort doctrinal truths, reaffirming the primacy of scriptural revelation over classical literature in matters of faith and theology. Calvin cites Virgil to demonstrate the erroneous beliefs of a universal soul, using the poet's work as an example of how literary admiration can lead to theological misinterpretation. This critique aligns with Calvin's broader effort to maintain doctrinal purity and correct attribution of divine qualities solely in God. 17th point, remember, Calvin's a very thick writer, a lot of info and very few words. The meaning of all this, that the world which was made to display the glory of God is its own creator. He criticizes the idea that the world is self creating, undermining God's role as creator. Calvin is criticizing the belief that the world is self creating, thereby undermining the fundamental Christian doctrine that God is creator of all things. Calvin's critique is directed towards the philosophical and metaphysical notions prevalent in certain schools of thought, which suggest that the universe has the capacity to bring itself into existence without any external divine intervention. This idea, often associated with pantheistic or naturalistic worldviews, posits that the natural world and its processes are self sufficient and self originating. Calvin argues that such a perspective is not only logically flawed, but also theologically erroneous. The world, in his view, was created by God to display his glory. Every aspect of creation, from the vastness of the cosmos to the intricacies of life on earth, serves as a testament to God's power, wisdom, and majesty. Claim that the world is its own creator is to deny this fundamental purpose and to strip God of his rightful role and honor as the sovereign creator. By asserting that the world is self creating, opponents of this view effectively deny the necessity of a divine being who transcends creation. This stands in stark contrast to the Christian understanding, which holds that God is both immanent and transcendent over his creation. He is intimately involved in the working of the universe, sustaining it by his power, and yet distinct from it. Calvin's argument is deeply rooted in the biblical narrative, which consistently affirms God as the creator. From the opening chapters of Genesis, which describe God's acting creation ex nihilo, out of nothing, to the Psalms and prophets that celebrate his creative works, the Bible presents a coherent and unified picture of God as the sole originator of all that exists. Calvin's statement criticizes the idea that the world is self creating, which undermines God's role as the creator. He emphasizes that the world was made to display God's glory, and any belief that attributes creation to the world itself is both logically unsound and theologically incorrect. By affirming God's sovereignty in creation, Calvin underscores the importance of recognizing and honoring God as the ultimate source and sustainer of all life and existence. Point 18 now. The same poet has, in another place, adopted a view common to both Greeks and Latins. He points out Virgil's widespread influence on this erroneous belief. He's highlighting the significant influence Virgil and similar poets had on the propagation of a philosophical perspective that Calvin deems to be erroneous. This point serves to emphasize the pervasiveness of the belief in a self creating or self sustaining universe within classical literature and thought, which Calvin argues is contrary to Christian doctrine. Calvin is referring to the way poets like Virgil, whose works were highly esteemed in Greek and Latin cultures, have contributed to the widespread acceptance of ideas that undermine the acknowledgement of God as the creator. Virgil's poetry, revered for its artistic merit and philosophical depth, often explored themes of nature, the cosmos, and the divine. However, some interpretations of his work suggest a worldview in which the universe operates independently of a singular sovereign God. By citing Virgil, Calvin is pointing out that this influential poet's writings reflect and reinforce a belief system that sees the world as self sustaining, a view shared by many Greek and Latin thinkers. This perspective aligns with pantheistic or naturalistic philosophies, which posit that the divine is inherent in the world itself rather than existing as distinct, transcendent. Virgil's influence is significant because his works, particularly in the Aeneid, were not only literary masterpieces but also cultural touchstones that shaped the intellectual landscape of the Western world. His portrayal of the cosmos and nature carried considerable weight, impacting both contemporary and subsequent generations of thinkers. Calvin's concern is that widespread acceptance of these ideas can lead people away from the truth of God's sovereignty and creative power. By acknowledging Virgil's influence, Calvin aims to show that the erroneous beliefs is deeply embedded in cultural and intellectual traditions, making it all the more important to counter it with a correct understanding of God as the creator. So, in summary, Calvin's reference to Virgil and his influence underscores how deeply rooted and widespread the belief is in a self creating universe, was in classical literature. That belief, common among Greeks and Latins, stands in stark contrast to the Christian doctrine of God as the sole creator. Calvin's critique is aimed at redirecting attention back to the acknowledgement of God and his sovereign role in creation, challenging the pervasive cultural narratives that detract from this truth. So, point 19. Here we see how far that J. June's speculation of a universal mind animating and invigorating the world is fitted to beget and foster piety in our minds. Kelvin argues that the idea of a universal mind fails to inspire true piety. Kelvin describes the idea of a universal mind as J. June's speculation. The term J. June, not a common word, means dull, insipid, or lacking in substance and nourishment. By using this word, Kelvin highlights the inadequacy and superficiality of this concept. The notion of a universal mind suggests that an impersonal, overarching intelligence animates and sustains the world. This belief in common, this belief common in certain philosophical traditions like Stoicism and Neoplatonism, reduces the divine to a diffused force permeating the cosmos rather than a personal sovereign god. Basically, a force from Star Wars is what he's trying to get at. Calvin argues that such an abstract and impersonal idea does not foster true piety, which he defines as heartfelt reverence and devotion to a personal God. For Calvin, true piety arises from a relationship with a God who is both transcendent and immanent, one who is not only the creator and sustainer of the universe, but also intimately involved in the lives of individuals. The concept of a universal mind being too detached and theoretical fails to evoke the awe, gratitude, and devotion that comes from recognizing God's personal nature and active presence. It strips away the relational aspects crucial for fostering a deep and sincere piety. True piety, in Calvin's view, involves a personal connection with God, characterized by worship, trust, and obedience. Calvin's critique emphasizes the importance of understanding God as a personal being who actively engages with creation. This understanding is essential for cultivating genuine piety, as it inspires believers to respond with love, devotion, and obedience. The abstract notion of a universal mind lacks this relational dimension, and therefore is ineffective in nurturing the kind of piety that Calvin advocates. Calvin is arguing that the idea of a universal mind animating the world is insufficient for inspiring true piety. True piety stems from a relationship with a personal God who is both transcendent and immanent. The impersonal and abstract nature of the universal mind fails to evoke devotion and reverence necessary for genuine piety, underscoring the importance of a personal understanding of God and fostering a heartfelt and devout religious life. By describing the speculation as J. June, Kelvin underscores this lack of depth and nourishment, reinforcing his point that only a personal and active relationship with God can truly inspire and sustain piety. Point 20. We have a still clearer proof of this in the profane verses, which the licentious Lucretius has written as a deduction from the same principle. He uses Lucretius's writings to demonstrate the impiety of this belief. He's using the impiety inherent in the belief of a universal mind in Lucretius as an animating. Lucretius thought it was an animating principle of the world. Calvin views Lucretius's work as a clear example of how this philosophical stance leads to irreverence and moral degradation. Calvin criticizes the notion of a universal animating mind, arguing that it detracts from the recognition of a personal sovereign God. To underscore his point, he cites the work of Lucretius, whose poem De Re Natura, on the nature of things, expounds on Epicurean philosophy. Lucretius describes a universe governed by chance and natural laws rather than divine intervention, and he denies the existence of an afterlife and the involvement of gods in human affairs. By referencing Lucretius as licentious, Calvin highlights the moral and spiritual implications he sees in adopting such a worldview. He implies that Lucretius's rejection of divine providence and promotion of materialism leads to a life devoid of moral constraints and reverence for the divine. Calvin's use of the term profane further emphasizes his view that Lucretius's verses are not only impious but also undermine the foundational beliefs necessary for piety and morality. For Calvin, belief in a universal mind, which might seem a harmless or purely intellectual stance, has significant negative consequences. He erodes the foundation of piety by denying the personal nature of God and the moral order he has established. Lucretius's work serves as a stark example of how such philosophical positions can lead to a worldview that Calvin finds spiritually bankrupt and morally dangerous. you are unaware of who Lucretius was, his full name was Titus Lucretius Carus. He lived around the years 99 to 55 BC. He was a Roman poet and philosopher, best known for his epic poem De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. In his work, Lucretius presents an idea of Epicurean philosophy, which emphasizes the role of reason and the senses in understanding the world, and advocates for the pursuit of pleasure and the avoidance of pain as the primary goals of life. He argues that the universe operates according to natural laws, and that the gods, if they existed, are indifferent to human affairs. Lucretius's poem profoundly influenced later philosophical and scientific thought by promoting a naturalistic view of the world. His ideas prefigured modern scientific inquiry by rejecting supernatural explanations in favor of natural causes. During the Renaissance, his work was rediscovered and contributed to the growing interest in empirical observation and questioning of traditional religious beliefs. Calvin's personal opinion of Lucretius was that he viewed Lucretius with significant disdain, both for his philosophical stance and the moral implications it has. Calvin saw Lucretius's materialism and denial of divine providence as fundamentally at odds with Christian doctrine. By describing Lucretius as licentious, Calvin suggests that his philosophy leads to moral decay and irreverence. Calvin uses Lucretius as a negative example to warn against the dangers of adopting a worldview that excludes a personal sovereign God. And you know what? Calvin is right when he points out that denying God the way Lucretius does leads to moral decay and irreverence. That is factually true. You can see that in societies that have embraced an atheistic worldview, like the communists who murdered and enslaved hundreds of millions of people, or even Western civilization we see now, where we are actively, on a societal level, denying God and Christian theism as a whole. And we've reached the point where big shot intellectuals in the university system are coming up with insane ideas like men can get pregnant. Like, yeah, denying God leads to moral nihilism ultimately. So Calvin's reference to Lucretius serves as to highlight the impiety and moral dangers he perceives in the belief of a universal animating principle. By illustrating how Lucretius' materialistic and atheistic views lead to what Calvin considers a profane and licentious outlook on life, Calvin reinforces his argument for the necessity of recognizing a personal, involved God to foster true piety and moral order. This critique underscores Calvin's broader theological position that the acknowledgement of God's sovereignty is essential for both spiritual and moral well being. There, you're back on camera. You can stop meowing all the time, right? So, point 21. The plane object is to form an unsubstantial deity and thereby banish the true God, whom we ought to fear and worship. The ultimate goal of such beliefs is to replace the true God with an unsubstantial deity. Calvin here is criticizing the philosophical tendency to construct a vague, insubstantial concept of divinity that ultimately seeks to displace the true sovereign God of Christianity. Calvin argues that certain philosophical beliefs, particularly those espousing the idea of a universal animating principle or mind, aim to create a deity that lacks substance and reality. This unsubstantial deity is a vague, abstract concept rather than a personal involved in sovereign God. For Calvin, this shift represents a deliberate attempt to avoid the implications of acknowledging the true God, who demands reverence, fear, and worship. Man, yeah, being a naughty kitty, huh? Because the camera's on. When it's turned off, you're going to be super well behaved, aren't you? By proposing an insubstantial deity, these beliefs effectively remove the moral and spiritual obligations that come with recognizing a sovereign God. The true God, as revealed in Christian doctrine, is not only the creator and sustainer of the universe, but also a judge and personal being with whom humans have a relationship. God demands worship, obedience, and moral living. In contrast, an unsubstantial deity, being abstract and impersonal, does not demand such reverence or adherence to moral standards. Calvin sees this philosophical move as a way to escape accountability to a higher moral authority. By replacing the true God with a nebulous concept, individuals can justify living according to their own desires without fearing divine judgment. This, in Calvin's view, leads to a society devoid of true piety and moral direction. Furthermore, Calvin believes that this trend undermines the foundational truths of Christianity. By promoting an abstract deity, these philosophies erode the personal and relational aspects of the Christian faith. The worship of an insubstantial deity fails to inspire true devotion, moral transformation, or a genuine understanding of God's nature and purposes. On the point 22, I admit indeed that the expression nature is God may be piously used if dictated by a pious mind, but as it is inaccurate and harsh, nature being more properly the order which has been established by God. Calvin acknowledges that nature as God can be used piously, but isn't actually factually true. And 23, in matters which are so very important and in regard to which special reverence is due, it does harm to confound the deity with inferior operations of his hands. Misidentifying nature as God is harmful and diminishes the reverence due to the Creator. Calvin is arguing that conflating God with his creation undermines the reverence and proper understanding of God's supreme nature. Calvin begins by emphasizing the gravity of theological matters, particularly those concerning the nature and identity of God. He highlights the importance of maintaining a clear and accurate understanding of God's relationship with him and the relationship with his creation. In Calvin's view, special reverence is due to God because of his supreme nature and the fact that he is the creator and sustainer of all things. When people confound the deity with the inferior operations of his hands, they make a critical theological error. Calvin refers to nature and the physical universe as the inferior operations because while they are works of God, they are not equivalent to God himself. Nature is a product of God's creative power, but it is not divine. By confusing the creator with his creation, individuals diminish the distinct and exalted status that God holds. This confusion is harmful for several reasons. One, diminishing God's majesty. When God is equated with nature, his transcendence and majesty are reduced. God in Christian theology is infinitely greater than his creation. He's not bound by the physical laws and limitations of the universe. Using God with nature implies that he is on the same level as his creation, diminishes his infinite greatness. Two, undermining worship. Proper worship requires a clear understanding of who God is. If believers see God as merely synonymous with nature, their worship becomes misdirected. True reverence is due to God alone, who is above and beyond his creation. Worshipping the creation rather than the creator leads to idolatry. And three, theological clarity. Maintaining a clear distinction between God and his creation ensures theological clarity. It helps believers understand God's attributes, such as his omnipotence, omniscience, and omnipresence, in a way that reflects his true nature. This clarity is essential for developing a correct relationship with God and understanding his will. In summary, Calvin warns against the theological error of identifying nature with God. Such confusion is harmful as it diminishes the reverence due to the Creator, undermines proper worship, and leads to theological misunderstandings. By recognizing the distinction between God and His creation, believers can maintain a special reverence that is due to God, acknowledging His supreme and transcendent nature while appreciating the natural world as His handiwork. And so that is it. That is going through the whole of the section 5 of chapter 5, book 1. And yeah, that's pretty much all I have to say. I hope you got something out of it. I know I've had a somewhat sanctifying effect having studied this and learning deeper. So continue to follow Jesus, who is the way. I'll see you next time. Bye.